It happened before sunrise in a room where papal decisions were usually measured in policies, councils, and carefully worded statements. But that morning, Pope Leo XIV did something that wasn't written on any agenda. He broke protocol. And he did it with a single sentence. "Bring Tiberius to me." The words hung in the air like incense. His secretary blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Holy Father?" "The dog," Leo repeated softly. "Bring him here. To the Apostolic Palace." No one moved. Not out of disobedience, but because the entire Vatican had been holding its breath since the night Leo disappeared quietly into Santa Maria Maggiore. Rumors had already begun to spread. Some said he had knelt in the dark beside Francis' tomb. Others claimed they saw him return with red eyes, walking slower, breathing heavier. But no one knew what had truly happened. And now this? A pope asking for a dog? "Shall I arrange a private room for him?" The secretary whispered, still cautious. "No," Leo replied, standing from his chair. "I will receive him publicly. Let the world see." The secretary's eyes widened. "Today?" Leo nodded. He placed his hands on the desk, leaning forward. "Tell the guards. Tell the press. Tell the people. We will meet on the steps of St. Peter's." The secretary swallowed hard. "And what shall we say it means?" Leo smiled gently. "We will say nothing. Let them find the meaning." And just like that, the most powerful voice in the Catholic Church had just chosen a silent sermon. By mid-morning, word had already started to leak. It began with whispers among the Swiss guards. Then the Vatican press office received a simple message, short, almost cryptic. "The Holy Father requests that Tiberius be brought to St. Peter's Square before noon." No additional instructions. No official statement. No clarification. And yet, the Vatican staff knew exactly what this meant. The handlers, the sacristans, the security personnel, they all exchanged glances, half in disbelief, half in awe. No one had expected this. The new pope, who had barely finished his first official meetings, had just opened the Vatican gates for a dog. A single van was dispatched quietly to Santa Maria Maggiore. The priests on duty there were waiting. Tiberius had remained near the tomb all night again, refusing food, refusing comfort. His fur was slightly ruffled, his eyes heavy with a loyalty that neither time nor death had broken. When the handlers approached, they expected resistance. But something remarkable happened. Tiberius stood. He didn't growl. He didn't retreat. He simply looked up at them as if to say, "I know where I need to go." He climbed into the vehicle without hesitation, curling into a quiet ball on the seat. No leash. No collar. As if he had already decided. Meanwhile, in the Apostolic Palace, Leo XIV stood on the balcony overlooking the square, watching the preparations. He placed both hands on the railing, whispering to himself, "They will expect an explanation." He paused, breathing deeply. "But I will give them something better. I will give them a moment. A moment that wouldn't be about doctrine, or authority, or law, but about what the world had forgotten how to recognize, the silent power of a human heart, choosing to love." By the time the van reached the edge of Vatican City, the world already knew. Cameras had started gathering at the perimeter. Journalists spoke in hurried tones. News outlets from every continent pushed headlines faster than they could verify them. Pope Leo XIV to appear with dog of Pope Francis. Unexpected ceremony? Papal gesture? What is happening at the Vatican? The dog who waited might be going home. In cafes across Rome, televisions flickered. In convents and seminaries, radios buzzed. In airports, people paused mid-journey, looking up at screens. Some laughed softly. Some wept. Some rolled their eyes. But no one looked away. In the square, the crowd began to grow, not the usual crowd of tourists and pilgrims, but locals. Romans who had watched popes come and go their entire lives, yet had never seen anything like this. The air shifted. There were no banners. No hymns. No formal procession. Only people standing in curious, reverent silence. And then the bell rang, not the great bell of the conclave, not the call to mass, but a single chime, sharp and clear, as the bronze doors of St. Peter's slowly opened. There stood Pope Leo XIV. Alone. No guards. No entourage. His eyes scanning the crowd not with command, but with kindness. The van pulled into view. Tiberius, as if sensing the moment, stood tall, looking out the window with surprising calm. And when the handlers opened the door, he stepped down. Not rushed. Not forced. But as if he had walked these stones his entire life. The people leaned in, breathless. And in that sacred pause, Rome held its breath. Tiberius stood at the edge of the van for a moment that felt like eternity. The square, so often a place of chants, applause, or papal proclamations, was now completely silent. Even the birds circling above seemed to pause in mid-flight. And then, Tiberius began to walk. Not toward the cameras. Not toward the crowd. Toward him. Toward the man in white waiting at the top of the steps. Pope Leo XIV didn't move at first. His throat tightened, his hands trembled slightly at his sides. He felt like a child waiting for forgiveness. When Tiberius reached the base of the stairs, Leo began to descend. Step by step. Slow. Deliberate. His white robes trailing behind him like a wave of silence. When they finally stood face to face, no more than a breath apart, Leo did not reach for him. He did not kneel yet. He simply looked into the dog's eyes and whispered with a voice that the microphones barely caught, "You waited for him. Would you wait for me too?" Tiberius, without hesitation, leaned forward and placed his head softly against Leo's knee. A wave of emotion swept through the crowd. People gasped, covered their mouths, or simply let tears fall. And in that fragile moment, Pope Leo XIV, Vicar of Christ, successor of Peter, fell to his knees, lowering himself until he could wrap his arms gently around the creature who had taught the world what loyalty looked like. He did not speak. He did not wave. He simply held on. And in that embrace, something louder than any papal decree was proclaimed. The throne of the church was not a chair. It was the floor where hearts meet, without fear. It happened far from the lenses. No balcony. No plaza. No public blessing. Just the marble corridors of the Apostolic Palace, where only a handful of staff members stood silently at the threshold of the Pope's private residence. Tiberius had been brought inside the gates quietly. No press had been notified. No cameras had been allowed. Yet somehow, every person present knew they were witnessing something more powerful than any liturgy. The handlers paused near the grand entrance, unsure whether to release the dog fully inside. Pope Leo XIV stood at the opposite end of the hall, watching in silence. He raised a hand slowly. "Let him come," he whispered. The handlers nodded and let Tiberius step forward. The sound of the dog's paws on polished marble echoed softly, like a heartbeat filling a silent cathedral. And then, before anyone could fully process the sacredness of it all, the Pope knelt again. But this time he did not kneel for the world to see. He knelt for himself. For the man who had not yet fully accepted the unbearable weight of Peter's chair. Tiberius approached, not with excitement, not with fear, but with something far more mysterious, recognition. The dog pressed his head gently against Leo's chest. And in that fragile, quiet moment, the Pope broke the silence with a whisper so raw that only those standing closest could hear. "I have nothing to give you, but my heart." No applause followed. No official photos were taken. But every soul in that hallway knew they had just witnessed the most human moment of this papacy, before it had even begun. That night, long after the quiet adoption had taken place, Leo XIV sat alone beside the fireplace in his private quarters. Tiberius slept at his feet, breathing slow and steady, as if he had belonged there all along. The room was dimly lit, the weight of the day pressing gently on the Pope's shoulders. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands hanging loosely between them. No audience. No cameras. No agenda. Just a man, and a creature who had waited long enough to teach him the lesson no counsel could ever articulate. He spoke softly, not to anyone in particular, but to the walls, to the silence, to the spirit he was still learning to trust. "It was never about the dog," he whispered, almost laughing at himself. He looked down at Tiberius, who stirred slightly but didn't wake. "It was never about what the world expected me to say, or how they expected me to lead. It was always about who I am when no one is watching." He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "If I lose this tenderness, this ache, this holy weakness, then I will have lost everything." He reached down, gently brushing his fingers through the fur of the one who had stayed faithful until the very end. And in that quiet, he heard the real calling of a shepherd, not to conquer, not to command, not even to convince, but to stay close. to stay low enough to be touched by the pain of the world, and to remind the Church, not through words but through life itself, that the gospel begins when the mighty kneel, and the forgotten are embraced. Leo XIV whispered one last time, "Thank you, old friend, for reminding me who I'm supposed to be." And in that moment, the Church's greatest sermon had already been preached.